Why scientists fear this extinct predator. Crocodiles are scary enough. They're giant, scaly, toothy reptiles that hang out in shallow water, waiting to ambush their prey. And while modern crocs can get up to around 20 feet long, there was one ancient crocodile relative that grew even bigger, so big that scientists fear it may have been a real-life monster. Hey, it's me and welcome to Paleologic. Today we are talking about the scariest extinct predator, Sarcosuchus, the 40-foot crocodile. If crocodiles today are anything to go by, they would have looked basically identical millions of years ago, with the same kind of armored body, powerful jaws, and strong tails. But if we were to travel back in time to the Cretaceous period, which lasted from around 245 to 66 million years ago, we'd find some crocodiles that were much, much larger than any living croc, and some that were even semi-aquatic. These megacrocs were part of a group called the Dinosaur, and they are our first example of a real-life monster. Now, there are a few different genera in this family, but we will be focusing on just one today, Sarcosuchus. This ancient croc lived in what is now North and South America, Africa, and Europe. It also lived in both freshwater and marine environments, which means it could live in salty ocean water or in lakes and rivers. This flexibility would have given them access to more food sources and may have contributed to their massive size. Sarcosuchus was first described by German paleontologist Friedrich von Wien in 1930, but it took almost 80 years for the fossil to actually be found. That's because these fossils are really hard to come by. Most of what we know about Sarcosuchus comes from a single individual, nicknamed Sue. She was discovered in 2009 in the Sarcosuchus coal mine in northeastern Nigeria. And when her skull was unearthed, it became clear that she was unlike any other croc ever found there. The team of scientists led by paleontologist Paul M. Barrett at the Natural History Museum in London knew immediately that they had found something special. And after carefully cleaning and removing rock from the fossil, they realized that they had found the largest crocodile that had ever existed. Sarcosuchus had an incredibly long skull that was roughly the same length as its entire body. Its teeth were narrow and pointed like those of modern-day crocodiles, except that they were also serrated like a shark's teeth. The reason for these scary sharp teeth is that they were built for catching and tearing up flesh. Sarcosuchus also had 13 openings along its skull that were connected to its jaw muscles. Unlike modern crocodiles, which only have 4 of these openings, these extra holes allowed more muscle to be attached to its skull, giving it a stronger bite force. But the coolest feature of the Sarcosuchus skull has to do with its nostrils. See, crocodiles don't breathe through their mouths. Instead, they have 2 pairs of nostrils that are connected to their nasal passages. One pair sits on the top of their snouts, and the other sits at the front of their skulls. The front nostrils are used for smelling, while the top ones are used for breathing underwater. Crocs usually lift their heads out of the water to breathe, but they can also use suckling to force water up into their top nostrils. But the nostrils of Sarcosuchus were positioned farther back on its skull than in modern crocs. And this meant that they wouldn't get water shoved up their nostrils while they were hunting underwater. So they didn't need to pop their head above the water to catch their breath. They could hunt and breathe at the same time, and that is pretty freaky. But wait, it gets better. When scientists examined the inside of Sarcosuchus' skull, they found that it had expanded rear chambers called sinuses, similar to those found in turtles, snakes, and birds. Now, these structures serve many purposes, including making the skull lighter to help it float, providing space for the animal's eyes to sit, protecting the brain, and in the case of birds, helping them produce sound. But what did these holes do for a giant crocodile? Well, researchers think that they might have had something to do with the sense of smell. They believe that Sarcosuchus had a keen sense of smell that helped them locate their prey from far away, maybe even from a mile off. When they compare the placement of these sinus cavities to that of modern crocodiles, they realize that Sarcosuchus would have had much larger scent organs. Because of these expanded sinuses, this ancient crocodile probably had the sense of smell of a bloodhound, and it used that nose to sniff out unsuspecting prey. Sarcosuchus was enormous, measuring over 40 feet long and weighing almost 1,000 pounds. That's longer than the Tyrannosaurus rex, and almost twice as heavy as the Spinosaurus. It was also almost as long as the largest dinosaur that ever lived, Argentinosaurus, and that's huge. It was such a large predator that it likely hunted large animals. including dinosaurs, turtles, and other crocodiles.
What?
And no animal was safe, not even other Sarcosuchuses. These ancient crocs were known to cannibalize one another, and that's something that's never been recorded in any other species of crocodile. The thing is, we still don't know exactly how big it got. You see, we haven't found a complete skeleton. So paleontologists have had to estimate its size based on the bones that they have found. The problem is that not all parts of the skeleton grow at the same rate. Take a bird, for example. Their legs grow faster than the rest of their body, so you can tell how old a bird is by measuring its tibia. Unfortunately, this rule of thumb doesn't apply to Sarcosuchus.
Sarcosuchus.
In fact, research shows that the growth rate of the front part of their skull was similar to the growth rate of the rest of their body. But since no two parts of the skeleton grow at the exact same rate, it's impossible to calculate how fast it grew or how long it took to reach adulthood. What's more, scientists don't know exactly how long it lived. Some studies say it lived for around 30 years, but others say it might have lived for 70 or even 100. Either way, it had a slow metabolism, which is why it was able to grow so big. In fact, scientists think that it had a metabolism that was 30 times slower than ours, which would make it the animal with the slowest metabolism that ever existed. Having a slower metabolism would have allowed them to conserve energy and grow to gigantic proportions. And speaking of growing big, Sarcosuchus wasn't the only member of its family that got large. Another crocodile relative called the Goniophysis lived in Asia and grew up to 13 feet long. But unlike Sarcosuchus, it had shorter, blunter teeth that were great for crushing turtles. Other members of the Phyllitosauridae include the 25-foot-long Hyposarchus, the 20-foot-long Ceratops, and the 19-foot-long Pliosaurus funky. Now, most of what we know about these megacrocs comes from their teeth and vertebrae, not from their skulls, which makes it really hard to tell how big they really got. We may never know exactly how large these monsters grew, but that doesn't stop the scientific speculation. Some paleontologists think that the Hyposarchus could have grown even bigger than the Sarcosuchus, reaching lengths of over 50 feet. It's important to remember that none of these animals are related to modern crocodiles. Instead, they are more like cousins. Modern crocodiles belong to a group called the Crocodilia, which includes alligators, caimans, and gharials. But the Sarcosuchus belongs to a separate group called the Phyllitosauridae. While the two groups are related, they are definitely not the same thing. And if you thought that was confusing, well, you're not alone. In fact, it took scientists over 150 years to figure out that these giant ancient crocs were actually crocodiles at all. In 1859, a British engineer named Gideon Mantell found a collection of teeth and vertebrae in southern England. He identified them as belonging to a new species of crocodile and gave them the scientific name Crocodilus megalodon. Later in 1930, Friedrich von Wien decided that this ancient crocodile deserved its own genus, and he renamed it Sarcosuchus megalodon. And then in 2009, when the type specimen was discovered, scientists realized that it wasn't a crocodile at all. Instead, it was a new member of the Phyllitosauridae, and so it was renamed once again to Sarcosuchus imperator. But you know what? We're just going to call it Sarcosuchus. It's easier to say. So why do scientists fear this extinct predator? Well, for starters, it was a giant, scary-looking monster that lived millions of years ago. But it's also really unknown. We don't know how big it got, we don't know how fast it grew, and we don't know how long it lived. All we know is that it was huge and terrifying. And honestly, that's scary enough for me. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to learn more about ancient creatures that are still being discovered today, be sure to subscribe. I have a whole playlist full of videos on extinct monsters that you're going to love. And as always, if you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them down below. I'll see you next time. Bye.